At first, Michael told himself it wasn't anything to worry about. Seattle was buried in a heavy winter drizzle, the kind that turned streetlights into smudged gold halos and made the hours drag. Lauren had texted earlier, saying she'd be late after a studio meeting, and late was part of their usual rhythm. Late meant leftovers on the stove and a sleepy kiss before bed. Late didn't mean midnight with no word. Michael stood at the living room window, phone in his palm, watching headlights sweep past and vanish. He refreshed the message thread again and again, as if the screen might finally give in out of sheer pity. It didn't. He tried calling once, then twice. The line went straight to voicemail. He left a calm message, pretending the calm was real, asking her to call when she could. After he hung up, the quiet in the house pressed heavier than the rain against the glass. He walked into the kitchen and saw her coffee mug still by the sink. A faint trace of lipstick lingered on the rim. She had rushed out that morning with a laugh, apologizing for running late, leaning back through the doorway to remind him about dinner with her mom that weekend. He remembered how the light had caught in her hair, and how he'd thought, not for the first time, how lucky he was. The memory landed hard. He checked the clock. 12:14 a.m. He sent a short text. *Hey. Just checking in. You okay? He stared at the message after it sent, watching the word delivered appear beneath it with no reply. Michael tried to distract himself. He turned on the TV, but muted it. Silent images filled the room, which somehow made everything worse. He turned it back off. He paced from the couch to the hallway, past framed photos from their wedding at Cannon Beach, past a picture of their first apartment with its cracked ceiling and tiny balcony. 8 years of marriage lined the walls. Smiling, steady. Nothing in those photos hinted at a night like this. He told himself she might have crashed at a coworker's if the meeting ran long. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she forgot her charger. Each excuse sounded thin, even in his own head. Lauren was considerate. She wouldn't let him worry like this unless something had shifted. By 1 a.m., his worry deepened into a quiet fear he didn't want to name. He imagined her car broken down on a dark road. Her sitting somewhere alone and upset. An argument he'd missed, a sign he'd ignored. Over the past year, she'd grown quieter, though he'd told himself it was just work stress. The studio had new management, and she often came home drained. He'd responded by staying later at his own job, believing that being responsible was the same as being present. Now, in the still house, he wondered if he'd mistaken routine for happiness. He walked into their bedroom and switched on the bedside lamp. The bed looked too large. Her book lay open on her pillow, a bookmark halfway through a chapter. He sat down and picked it up, staring at the page without reading. He tried calling again. Voicemail. This time, he didn't leave a message. He set the phone on the nightstand and leaned back against the headboard, listening to the heater hum on and off. Every small sound made him lift his head, thinking it might be the garage door or the front lock turning. It never was. Minutes stretched. He checked a location on the app they rarely used. It showed nothing new, just the last known point near downtown. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming faster against the roof. Michael pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to slow his thoughts. He replayed the last few weeks. Dinners eaten quietly. Evenings spent scrolling on opposite ends of the couch. Quick goodnight kisses. He'd noticed the distance but assumed it would pass, like a cold season that fades with time. He hadn't asked deeper questions because he feared the answers. At 2:30, he stood again and moved through the house, turning off lights Lauren usually turned off, straightening the throw blanket she always folded before bed. He paused at the front door and stepped onto the porch despite the rain. The street was empty, slick, silent. He listened for the sound of her car engine, a sound he could recognize from blocks away. Nothing came. He went back inside and locked the door, feeling foolish for expecting a sudden miracle. As the night edged toward morning, Michael stopped pretending he could sleep. He made coffee he didn't want and sat at the kitchen table, phone face up in front of him. Every few seconds he touched the screen just to keep it awake. He whispered a quiet promise to himself that when she walked through that door, he would ask better questions. He would listen more. He wouldn't let small silences grow into wide spaces. Yet as dawn began to lighten the sky, a deeper fear settled in his chest. A fear that this wasn't just a late night or a dead battery. It felt like the edge of something larger, something that had been building quietly while he was too busy to see it. And as the first pale light filled the kitchen, Michael understood that whatever was happening had already changed them, even before he knew the reason why. The next morning at 8:17, Michael's phone buzzed against the kitchen table, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet like a crack in glass. He hadn't slept. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, and pale morning light filled the room with a dull gray tone that made everything look distant. For a second, he froze, afraid to hope, afraid not to. Then he grabbed the phone so fast his chair scraped the floor. It was Lauren. Just her name on the screen made his chest tighten. He opened the message with shaking fingers. Michael, I'm safe. I'm sorry I didn't come home. I need some time. Please don't try to find me. He read it once, then again, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something softer. They didn't. The message was calm, clear, careful. She was safe. She needed time. He shouldn't look for her. The relief that she was safe rushed through him first. Warm, quick. But it was followed by confusion that settled heavy in his stomach. Safe from what? Time for what? He called her immediately. The call didn't ring. Straight to voicemail. He hung up and tried again, hoping the first attempt had failed by mistake. It didn't change. He typed back fast, thumbs moving without thinking. Lauren, please talk to me. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Just tell me where you are. He stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 small dots that meant she was typing. They never appeared. The house felt different now. Not just quiet, but hollow, as if something important had been removed. He walked into the living room, then back to the kitchen, unable to stay still. Her words repeated in his head. I need some time. The phrase felt polite but final, like a door closing gently instead of slamming. Michael tried to think clearly. She was safe. So she had chosen to leave for the night. That thought hurt more than any other. He sat down and forced himself to breathe slowly. Had there been signs? Over the past months, Lauren had smiled less, though she still smiled. She'd said she was tired, but everyone was tired. She'd gone to bed earlier, saying she had early meetings. He'd accepted those answers because they were simple. Now he wondered what she hadn't said. He thought about the evenings when they sat on opposite ends of the couch, both scrolling through their phones. He remembered asking once if she was okay, and she'd nodded without looking up. He'd taken that nod as truth. His phone stayed silent. He checked social media, her email, even the shared calendar on the wall. Nothing unusual stood out. Normal details of their life stared back at him. Appointments, reminders, grocery lists. It was strange how ordinary everything looked while his heart felt anything but. He stood and walked into their bedroom. Her closet door was slightly open. He stepped closer and noticed a small suitcase missing from the shelf above. The sight made his throat dry. She had planned this. Not in anger, not in panic, but with quiet thought. That realization hurt deeply. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his hands together, trying to stay steady. Hours passed slowly. Michael called in sick to work, his voice sounding distant even to himself. He couldn't imagine sitting at his desk, pretending life was normal. He moved through the house like a guest, touching objects that suddenly felt fragile. He picked up a photo frame from their wedding day and studied Lauren's face in the picture. She had looked at him with full trust, eyes bright with belief in the future. He wondered if she still looked at him that way, or if that light had faded. When he wasn't paying attention, he didn't feel anger toward her. He felt fear. Fear of losing something he'd assumed was permanent. Around noon, he stepped outside to clear his head. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and fresh. Neighbors walked dogs. Cars passed. Life continued without noticing his private storm. He checked his phone again. No new messages. He considered driving to the studio, but her words echoed clearly. "Please don't try to find me." He didn't want to push her further away. She needed space. Chasing her might break whatever fragile threads still connected them. That thought required more patience than he felt capable of, but he forced himself to respect it. By late afternoon, the waiting became its own kind of pain. He replayed their last conversation again and again. She had kissed him goodbye that morning. She hadn't seemed distant or cold. She had seemed thoughtful, as if carrying something heavy behind her smile. He realized now that he had noticed the weight but had chosen not to ask about it. He had believed love meant giving space, not understanding that sometimes love meant stepping closer. The sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows. Michael sat at the dining table and set out 2 plates without thinking, then stopped and put one back in the cabinet. The small action made everything real. When evening came, he checked his phone one more time before turning off the lights. Still nothing. The message from the morning remained the only sign of her presence. He lay down in their bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. He told himself she was safe. He held on to that word as if it were a lifeline. Safe meant she was thinking, not gone. Safe meant there was still a chance to talk. As darkness filled the room, Michael understood that this was no longer about a missed night or a late meeting. It was about something deeper that had been building quietly between them. And until she was ready to speak again, all he could do was wait, and face the uncomfortable truth that love, even steady love, could drift if left unattended. 3 days after her first message, when silence had stretched so long it felt normal, Michael's phone lit up again while he was sitting at his desk pretending to work. He'd read the same email 5 times without understanding a word, his mind drifting back to the empty side of the bed each night and the untouched mug still resting near the sink. The message was short. Asterisk, can we meet tomorrow? Same place as our first date. 6:00 p.m. asterisk. His heart reacted before his thoughts did. The bookstore cafe downtown. The small corner table by the window. The place where everything had once begun with nervous smiles and shy laughter. He stared at the message, unsure if this invitation meant hope or goodbye. Still, he typed back one word. Yes. The next day moved fast and slow at the same time. He shaved carefully, chose a clean blue shirt Lauren once said made his eyes look softer, and left work early without explaining why. As he drove through Seattle's familiar streets, memories followed him. The first time he'd picked her up for a date, the way she'd stepped out of her apartment building with a bright scarf wrapped around her neck, smiling like she already trusted him. He wondered if that version of them still existed, or if it had been replaced by 2 adults who had grown comfortable but distant. The sky was clear that evening, pale gold light falling over the sidewalks as he parked near the cafe. He arrived 20 minutes early because he couldn't bear the thought of keeping her waiting. Even now, inside, the place looked almost the same. Shelves lined the walls, filled with novels and poetry collections. The smell of coffee and paper mixed in the air. He chose the corner table by the window, the exact spot where he'd once spilled his drink because he was too nervous to hold the cup steady. Back then, Lauren had laughed and handed him extra napkins, her eyes warm and forgiving. He sat with his hands folded tightly, watching the door each time it opened. Every time it was someone else, his chest dropped a little. He told himself to stay calm. This meeting was a chance to listen, not defend. At exactly 6 o'clock, the door opened again, and this time it was her. Lauren stepped inside slowly, as if measuring each step. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose tie. She looked tired but clear, like someone who'd been thinking deeply. For a brief second, their eyes met across the room, and neither moved. The noise of the cafe faded in Michael's ears. She walked toward him, and he stood without planning to. They didn't hug. They simply looked at each other, taking in the small changes that 3 days of distance had created. She sat down first, and he followed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice steady but softer than usual. Michael nodded, not trusting himself to speak too soon. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but he forced himself to choose just one. "Why did you leave?" The question hung between them, simple and heavy. Lauren took a breath and looked down at her hands before meeting his eyes again. "I didn't leave because I don't love you," she said. The words brought a quick wave of relief, but it didn't last long, because her expression held more truth. "I left because I felt like I was fading," she continued. "Not from you exactly, but from myself." Michael leaned forward, listening carefully. She explained that over the past year, she'd started to feel lost. The studio job that once excited her now felt like a routine she moved through without joy. At home, their talks had become practical. Bills, schedules, grocery lists. They functioned well as partners, but she missed feeling seen as a person with dreams and fears. "I didn't know how to say it without sounding ungrateful," she admitted. "You work hard. You've always tried to take care of us. I didn't want to seem unhappy when our life looks good from the outside." Her honesty didn't accuse him, yet it still stung because he recognized the truth in it. He'd focused on stability, believing that providing comfort meant providing happiness. That night, she went on, "I realized I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. I packed a small bag and went to Claire's place in Portland. I turned off my phone because I needed to think without being pulled back too quickly." Michael absorbed her words slowly. She hadn't run in anger. She'd stepped away in confusion. "I was afraid if we talked right away, I would give in and pretend everything was fine," she said. "And I don't want to pretend anymore." Her eyes were bright but calm. Not angry, not cold. Just honest. Michael felt his defenses fade. "Why didn't I see it?" he asked quietly. Lauren offered a small, sad smile. "Because I didn't show you clearly. I kept saying I was tired. I kept smiling. I thought the feeling would pass." She paused before adding, "But I need more than routine. I need to grow. And I need to know we can grow together." The statement wasn't a threat. It was a question wrapped in hope. Michael reached for his coffee cup, realizing his hands were trembling slightly. He understood now that this meeting wasn't about ending their marriage. It was about deciding what kind of marriage they wanted. "So what happens now?" he asked. Lauren held his gaze. "I don't want to run away," she said. "I want us to wake up. I want us to talk about who we are becoming, not just what we have to do each day. But I can't fix this alone." Her words felt like an open door rather than a closing one. Michael nodded slowly, feeling both regret and determination rise inside him. He saw clearly how easy it had been to let comfort turn into distance. He also saw that she was still here, sitting across from him at the table where they once began. The moment felt fragile but full of possibility, like standing at the edge of something new. And as the light outside shifted toward evening, Michael realized this conversation might not break them apart, but instead give them a chance to choose each other again with open eyes. Rain began to fall again while they sat across from each other, soft drops sliding down the cafe window as if the city itself was holding its breath. Michael looked at Lauren and saw not distance but fear mixed with hope, the kind that appears when someone decides to speak the truth instead of hiding it. He reached across the small wooden table slowly, giving her time to pull back if she needed space. She didn't move away. Her fingers slipped into his, warm and familiar. And that simple touch carried more meaning than any long speech. He understood in that moment that love wasn't ending here. It was being tested, reshaped, asked to grow beyond routine. "I thought loving you meant working harder, earning more, building something safe," he said quietly, his voice steady but open. "I didn't see that you needed more than safety. You needed to feel alive." Lauren's eyes softened as she listened. "And I thought being strong meant handling my doubts alone," she replied. "I didn't want to look ungrateful. I didn't want you to think I was unhappy with you. But I was unhappy with who I was becoming." The honesty between them felt raw but clean, like fresh air after a long storm. They began to talk in a way they hadn't in years. Not about tasks or plans, but about feelings that had been sitting quietly under the surface. Lauren shared how she'd once dreamed of studying art therapy, how she wanted her work to help people heal instead of just selling paintings to wealthy buyers. She admitted she'd pushed that dream aside because adulthood felt heavy with bills and expectations. Michael listened without interrupting, realizing he'd never asked what she truly wanted beyond their shared goals. He confessed that he'd been afraid too, afraid of failing as a husband, afraid that if he slowed down at work, everything they'd built would fall apart. In trying to protect their future, he'd stopped nurturing their present. The rain outside grew steadier, but inside the cafe, something steady was forming between them. They spoke about small changes first, simple steps that felt possible, weekly dinners without phones, honest check-ins about how they were really feeling, a short trip away from Seattle, maybe to the Oregon coast, where they'd once walked for hours with no plan except being together. Lauren's face brightened slightly when he suggested she look into part-time classes. "We can adjust the budget," he said. "Dreams don't expire just because we get busy." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes, and he realized how much he'd missed seeing it. Time passed without them noticing until a barista gently announced closing time. They stood together, stepping outside into the cool evening air. The rain had softened to a light mist, streetlights reflecting off wet pavement in golden streaks. For a moment, they simply stood there, close but quiet, both understanding that this wasn't a perfect fix. It was a choice. Michael looked at her carefully. "Are you coming home tonight?" he asked, not demanding, not pleading, just asking. Lauren held his gaze and nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "But not because I'm afraid to leave. Because I want to stay and work on us." Those words settled into him deeply. Wanting to stay was different from feeling obligated to stay. They walked to the car side by side, their shoulders brushing lightly. The drive home felt calmer than the drive there. The streets were quiet, the city wrapped in the hush of late rain. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence was different now. Less like an absence and more like the space between two people learning to listen again. When they pulled into the driveway, Michael turned off the engine and looked at the house. Lights were on inside, left burning from the night before.